Hello everybody, Justin from Playing Board Games here, and today I'm excited to share with you another hot take video. This is the third one of this I've done on the channel, and I love doing them because they're just, it's really fun to challenge your own ideas, you know, to read things about the game and question if you are right or if maybe this other person is right. And the best way to do that is with hot takes, takes that make you go, huh? Right? So that's what this is. I've taken from previous comments on videos of this in the series, and I also asked our Discord channel for give me your hot takes, and I'm going to discuss them here and approach them in kind of a way where I'm going to try to understand and explain why this hot take could potentially be true. Like trying to argue in favor for it while also giving my own opinions. Unfortunately, if you're in this video to want to hear someone yell and scream and say what the hell, this is 100% wrong, this is not unfortunately going to be the video for you. But instead we're going to try to have a nuanced discussion about the 5 hot takes we have here. So let's dive in and talk about our first hot take, which is a lot of scenarios are poorly designed for the blind play. I like the difficulty and the scariness that can come out of unexpected agenda or act flips, but there are too many gotcha moments, spelt that wrong, that can just wreck a playthrough. So I think this one is a very interesting take to have, and I actually do think that this take is, while not necessarily hot for new players, I think this take is a hot take that is more on the perspective of people who have played a lot. Like myself, I also have a little bit of a different sort of approach for the idea of a blind play and what a blind play should do, and also just generically my thoughts, generally my thoughts on the difficulty level of this game. While I don't agree with this point, I think we should talk about some notable things that could be what's referenced here. So I have on this from Night of the Zealot. I have an example here on the far left of the screen of the Ghoul Priest. This guy shows up at the end of the gathering, and I don't necessarily think that he is a gotcha moment in the same sense of like what we've seen in some other stuff. I mean, to be honest, I actually have a hard time thinking of gotcha moments in this game, because I just can't really think of too many, and that's my own I guess burden about this discussion point. But I also have below me, I have 3 of the cultists from Midnight Masks. They're not that surprising to see in Midnight Masks because they kind of have to be there. However, in the Devourer below, the final scenario of the Night of Zealot campaign from the core set, you can get attacked by your surviving cultists. And we've all had this situation happen, and usually one of them ends up being Herman Collins, just because he's always the one that you usually don't interact with somehow. But this is, I think, the first big, what you could potentially call a gotcha moment in the game. In my opinion, I couldn't really think of another one, maybe there's more, but this one of all the cultists that you did not kill showed, one, that there were repercussions to your actions. So if you did not do good enough, the other cultists would strike back against you. But it's also showing you that when the story progresses, which is why I'm pretty sure the design of the act and agenda cards are a book, because it's the idea that this is the story progressing and something is happening. That is when bad things can happen. And I think it was trying to teach you that in that. Another big gotcha moment is the supplies from the Forgotten Age. And this is actually something that is pretty relevant because I was just on a Discord channel. There's a huge conversation about supplies and if they are fair or not, right? If they are good design or bad design. And I think a big reason why supplies feel so gotcha or bad design is because supplies, there's no signposting of what a supply is. It's kind of just arbitrary of what something does, right? A big conversation for this was the blankets giving you trauma, right? If you don't have the blankets, you're going to be getting trauma. Slight spoilers for Forgotten Age, but now you know if you haven't played it. If you don't want trauma, take blankets. But it's one of those things that I can understand from a new player perspective how that can feel really bad. And in the quotes for this here, wreck a playthrough. Now, where I disagree is from my idea of what this game is, right? I think that, like with Dungeons and Dragons, we saw this shift happens with Dungeons and Dragons, where it kind of became more about everyone having a good time, right? And I'm not gonna pretend and say that everyone having a good time is a bad thing, but at a certain point with Arkham Horror, a thing kind of happened as well, where the power fantasy from this game shifted to what I saw MJ describe in an article. That was like, there was the image in their mind, which was the story that the game can paint, where you are Roland Banks with your last bullet in your .45 automatic going against a ghoul that has you cornered, right? And then it's just like the desperation that provides was a very early idea of what Arkham Horror, the card game, was going to be. But then at a certain point it shifted to I am Roland Banks and I am chopping through this door with my magic axe and the ghoul is running away from me, right? So I think, in my opinion, for this take, for me personally, it's less that I think that scenarios are poorly designed for the blind play, but more that I think people don't want to be surprised, and it feels worse when they're surprised, but I think that it ultimately makes the game better if you don't know what's coming, right? A blind play is a very cherished thing in this game. You only get one shot at it. And to me, the scenarios that I remember being bad for my blind plays are not because of gotcha moments or anything like that on Eject and Agenda flips. My blind plays that I remember negatively are the scenarios that were, in my opinion, over-designed. And it's less about that being poorly designed for the blind play, but rather, for example, Horror and High Gear in the Innsmouth Conspiracy, that was a really bad blind play for me, right? Because that scenario was just like too many moving parts for a blind play, and it was very overwhelming. I think it's, for me, when I read this one, I can like sympathize with, I can empathize with the idea that it's not fun to be surprised and then suddenly be on the back foot. But I think that is better overall for the game, and I like it more like that. So I can understand, like, you, and even like the idea where people complain about how in a campaign suddenly you feel like your character is being countered, or in the City of Archives in the Forgotten Age where you feel like, oh, my deck doesn't do the thing it wants to do, and that makes me angry. I've said on this channel before that I feel like players need to remember that the scenario isn't your teammate. It is not your friend trying to make you have a good scenario. The scenario is your opponent trying to beat you, and you need to beat it. And you can't beat it if you're going to complain about how it's unfair. So it's like one of those things that's my perspective on this take. Let's go to our next one here, which is investigators with 5 in any stat should get 1 less health and or sanity to make playing them less safe. I don't think this hot take is particularly spicy. Like, it's pretty low on the Scoville rating in terms of opinions, but I do think that this hot take is gonna ruffle a few feathers for the people who enjoy that power fantasy again. So that's actually something that I think is and I actually think it's going to be very cool when Current and Legacy become a thing, because I do feel as though we are going to get a sort of divide where, not necessarily straight down the middle, right? There's going to be power gamers who are going to want to try to make the current environment work in the most powerful way possible, and that's really exciting to them. But I feel like the players who have been limiting their own collection or have been trying to just like play for that traditional feel of Arkham, where like you feel a little bit less powerful, are going to enjoy current a lot more than legacy. And those people who, again, as I flash back to cutting down the door and the ghoul's like, please don't kill me, Gruul, please, with the runic axe, are going to enjoy legacy a lot more. And I think that this is where this hot take kind of comes into place, right? Where 5 in a stat line is a very powerful thing. I have Tony Morgan and Daisy Walker, who we're going to talk about first, because I actually think Mark Harrigan is separate from this conversation, right? I think Mark Harrigan is his own special little guy. But Tony Morgan and Daisy Walker are two very strong investigators, and in theory, they have this downside where they only have, in Tony Morgan's case, 5 horror, in Daisy Walker's case, 5 health, right? 5 sanity for Tony, 5 health for Daisy, right? Like, that is in theory making them weaker. And it's true. It does make them weaker, right? But the person behind this hot take was saying that these investigators should be even weaker, right? So if we theorize, for example, Tony Morgan is an 8-4. A lot of people, myself included, would probably say that is too little, right? That's too little sanity, because Tony Morgan already also tries to soak more. Like a lot of Tony Morgans are going to be playing Lottie Ritter because of that horror thing. But with a legacy full pool, it's actually pretty easy to survive these things. They have a lot more things that you don't even necessarily need to do. You don't even need to do Lonnie as much anymore. Like, I actually just did a Tony Morgan run with Robert Castaigne, and I actually died. Well, I didn't die. Well, I did die, but that's different. I was closer to dying more by damage than horror the entire campaign, which was very interesting. And I do think that, for example, if we picture a Tony Morgan and a Daisy Walker with one less of their higher stat, if they were an 8-5 and a 5-8, I think that would be a very interesting conversation to have about how, while the number isn't changing that much, I do think that it would lead to a more interesting experience with these investigators. And while I don't think it would weaken them too much, I think it would be a neat little point to shift to make these investigators feel a little bit more on the same level of someone like, for example, Roland Banks, right? Because Roland Banks has a pretty fair stat line compared to Tony Morgan, and he has the exact same health and sanity pools. And that's kind of a big reason, one of the big reasons. Well, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, Tony, like, and also, like, Roland Banks has the weakness that deals in horror, right? Like, deals in mental trauma. But these are, like, one of those things that you look at the two and you're thinking, like, what the hell happened to Roland? And it's one of the reasons, going back to that thing I was just saying, that Roland Banks is, like, a little bit lower on the power totem pole because of that. Because he has the stat line that's worse, but the exact same health and sanity pools. So if Tony Morgan was looking a little bit smaller, like 8-5, for example, I think that could be a potential shift to maybe see things change a little bit. I mean, 9-5 is still a lot. It's still a lot, but I think that would be very interesting. And the reason why I included Mark Harrigan here is because I do think that Mark Harrigan is one of the most successful investigator designs they've ever done. And I think he is the 5-fist investigator that feels the most like... I think he feels the most right in terms of line of what this hot take is saying, right? Because you have to play Sophie, and Sophie gets mad if your health drops too low. So as Bryn always says, Mark Harrigan is actually a 5-5, right? So what this means is that Mark Harrigan has to put in a few pieces into his deck. His deck building is already kind of chained to his weakness to ensure that he doesn't fall into that weakness, which I think, while still making him a very strong investigator, makes it so that he has restrictions and limitations that someone, for example, like Daisy Walker doesn't. Of course, Daisy Walker doesn't have 5 fist, but she has 5 book, and she is still very good at getting the job done, and you rarely are playing around that 5 damage, that 5 health, and worrying about it as Daisy Walker. So I do think that this is a very very good take, and I agree with it. I think this is a very nice change that should have had happen to these investigators. All right, let's go on to take number 3, which is, I think this one's going to ruffle some feathers in the comments, and I'm very excited to dive into it. So, the amount of reading in Innsmouth, Edge of the Earth and Scarlet Keys is fine. Notably, this came out this is from one of my old hot takes from my hot take backlog before Hemlock Vale as well. All right, so the amount of reading in Innsmouth, Edge of the Earth, the Scarlet Keys is fine, and people who complain about too much reading are grading. Man, I just did not type these. I did not type these well. Are creating groupthink that has potential to make the game much, much worse. So creating groupthink, not grading groupthink, which is really funny. So I'm also just going to look up the definition of groupthink for people who might not know what that is. It is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll say it anyway. So groupthink is opting to conform with the consensus view rather than engage in critical thinking. And this is actually, I think, a very apt point for one thing that I like doing this and why I like talking about opinions that I may not necessarily believe or agree with, or believe in or agree with, because it allows me to challenge my perceptions of these things. So, as someone who was not fine with the amount of reading in Innsmouth, Edge of the Earth, and the Scarlet Keys, let's dive in and think about this. And I think we have to break down this take into 2 points, right? Because I think the first one is the amount of reading in Innsmouth, Edge of the Earth, the Scarlet Keys is fine. But then I think the juicier point of this take is the complaint about how this can create groupthink, right? I think that is a very interesting thing to talk about here, because I actually think it can be pretty true in the sense that especially in online communities, they kind of become echo chambers. It's something that we always joke about whenever we do one of our list videos where we bring in responses from the community and we talk about how much is this falling into our PBG echo chamber and how much are they stepping out of it. And it's something that I am trying to become more aware of as a content creator, where I like to try to be a little bit more open with my opinions and not as rigid, because I like the idea of the community as a whole, at least our PBG community. I'm not talking about the ARKHAM community. The PBG community is also excited to do that open thinking for the game as well. I think it just generally makes discussion and stuff more interesting. So I do think that there are a lot of people who do say that they are fine with the reading for Scarlet Keys. And I do think that this idea that people think Scarlet Keys is bad because of the reading is, I think it's unfortunately an agreement that there is some groupthink there. But I think a big thing is that it's the easiest thing to express the frustrations that people have with the structure of Scarlet Keys. Because I do think that Feast of Hemlock Vale, for example, I put it here next to Scarlet Keys because I think they're actually like very good brother-sister campaigns in terms of the approach of looking at an open structure and also the amount of reading. Hemlock Vale has a lot of reading, but its reading is disguised in the way that Scarlet Keys isn't. And people have their complaints about how the reading of Feast of Hemlock Vale, there's actually a lot of reading in the campaign, and I do agree there is a lot of reading, but like this point, I'm fine with the reading in Hemlock Vale because I think the structure is done a lot better. I think that while I think that the amount of reading should be a mechanic, which is gonna sound a little bit stupid, right, when I just say it like that. But like if you think of it like this, right, some campaigns have a running theme of big maps, right? Some campaigns have a running theme of small maps. Feast of Hemlock Vale has a campaign has a mechanical identity throughout all the scenarios where adjacent locations are connected to one another, right? Dunwich has a mill mechanic. I think that the amount of text that should exist should not be a set number that they are trying to hit each campaign. They should try to do what feels right for the mechanical identity and the structural identity of that campaign. For example, Drowned City, the most recent campaign at the time of recording this video, is very minimal in terms of its reading. But I think that the campaign was designed with the intention of being very minimal in terms of its structure and its structural complexity, especially when we come off of the bones of Scarlet Keys and Feast of Hemlock Vale, and to a lesser extent Edge of the Earth. Edge of the Earth is incredibly linear. It's not really on the same level as these two. I think going back to a smaller, less complexity in terms of structure led to less words that need to be there to tell a story. Because you can tell a story verbosely, you can tell it minimally, and no matter what, that's fine, right? Like, I don't think there is a right way to tell the story for this in terms of that. So my idea that I think that the too much reading, I agree, is groupthink, but I also don't necessarily think that each campaign needs to be as verbose as Hemlock Vale or Scarlet Keys, right? I think that it can be good that there are some that are less, and rightfully, if they ever return to the Codex, I think that there is a reason for there to be more reading, right? I think that also, if they want to do a lot of reading, and the people who do like reading, I still stand by my thing where, like, a quick read section and like a long read section, if they want to do it, is good. But I mean, I'm happy with the amount of reading that Hemlock Vale has. I think that one was a very nice thing. I'm enjoying what Drowned City has as well in terms of its reading, but I do think that the game is more interesting if it's not always the same in terms of mechanics. And I think, as I said, I do think that the amount of text in the campaign guide should be treated as a mechanic, and I think it makes the game more interesting because of that. As for the first point, where the amount of reading in Innsmouth, Edge of the Earth, Scarlet Keys is fine, I think that is a very well-known hot take compared to what we've seen online, and I don't have any beef with someone being happy with the amount of reading, but I am on the side that I prefer there to be less reading, because I like playing the game a lot more than I do hearing people tell me how my character should be feeling about playing the game, right? I'd rather just be like, instead of if I walk into a room and I see three people talking, I don't want them to talk and me just go, uh-huh, 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 right? I want to see my character just like, those people are like, all right, here's your job, go do it, and then I get to do it, right? Rather than them talking about what the job could potentially be. What is it? Levity is the soul of wit. Brevity is the soul of wit, right? Something like that. So that is my personal perspective on this. Okay. That was a long one. Let's go on to take number 4 here, which is the new skill value manipulation effects, starting with steady-handed and expanded widely in the Drowned City, are problematic and unhealthy. I think that this is a very interesting take, and I think that this is something that is worthy of discussion. And I think that there is a dividing line here between these two cards below me, right? Steady-handed. Limit 1 per investigator. When you would succeed at a skill test, exhaust steady-handed, you either succeed by 1 more or 1 less. If you succeeded by exactly 2, heal 1 horror. Let's compare that to artistic inspiration. Limit 1 per investigator. Nice. Those are the same so far. Uses 1 inspiration. Okay, so it's limited uses. Lightning Bolt. Exhaust artistic inspiration to discard 1 card from your hand. Replenish 1 inspiration on this card. As your reaction, after revealing chaos tokens for a skill test you're performing, spend 1 inspiration. You get +1 or -1 skill value for this skill test. So I was analyzing this topic, like this take here, and trying to discover myself, do I agree? And if I did, what makes this problematic? And I think that steady-handed, I think it's a strong card. If we ask what problematic is in ARKHAM, to me, what's problematic in ARKHAM is an archetype card that is so good that you don't care about you don't care about running the archetype. And I think that steady-handed is probably close to that definition, right? Like, this card was here for the science thing, this stuff like chemistry set, which you're not really doing, like, that's like the payoff to the manipulation, right? Or the Antikythera from Drowned City. Those are the payoff to the manipulation. The manipulation is like its own separate beast. And I think that's steady-handed, and by nature, artistic inspiration, which we haven't even started talking about yet, is good enough that I've just ran it in decks. Speaking back to our good friend Roland Banks with his 5 horror, his 5 sanity, I would play that card steady-handed just in Roland Banks without anything else that cares about the stuff about how much I succeed by. Just to have like drip horror healing in a way that is like so low to the ground and what it requests for me is probably pretty problematic. And then this went to artistic inspiration, which I think exacerbates the problem. One, it's level 0, and it's level 0 so George Barnaby can play it, right? That's the kind of like the mechanical structure for why artistic inspiration is a 0 level card compared to steady-handed's 1. To balance it out, you have limited uses and you need to spend a card to refresh it. So I don't think, in my opinion, it's going to be as ubiquitous, but it might be. Like, I have to see. I haven't even, the card has only been out for like a month at this point, so have to see more before I really like settle in on where it's going to be. But the big thing about artistic inspiration is after revealing chaos tokens for a skill test you're performing, you get +1 or -1 skill value for this skill test. You can use artistic inspiration even if you fail. It's a repeatable half lucky, which I think can be pretty bad. I think that can be pretty bad because a steady-handed, well, yeah, I've been playing it all the time, and I think it's a very good card. And if I go back to my previous definition of what problematic is, I do think that it is inherently problematic. It's only on a success, right? So you can't turn a fail into a success. But artistic inspiration is just a half lucky that you're kind of just sitting on. If these cards, for example, if we look at this card, steady-handed, and it didn't heal the horror, right? Let's just say when you would succeed at a skill test, exhaust steady-handed, you either succeed by 1 more or 1 less. I think that that would lead to a lot less of this problematic and unhealthy feeling potentially, because the only thing that really changes is during scenarios or like if you're a rogue, or even like like the mystic or the stuff which is like if you succeed by a certain amount, do a thing, or the precise archetype in Hemlock and Drowned City. There's really only like a few scenarios which is like how much you succeed by. So I think that I'd be very curious to see how steady-handed would be if it was more of an archetype card, but I think that ultimately it's probably better for the design team to make steady-handed be a bit more ubiquitous. I think artistic inspiration, there's a little flag on it, right? There's a little flag on it that I'm like, this card might be a bit of an issue. I need to see playing it more because cards are very powerful, and spending a card on a half lucky if you're not getting value out of discarding the card, I think ultimately is bad for your deck and bad for your ability to win in the long term. But I am watching it, and ultimately I agree with this point, and I'd love to know what people down in the comments think, because I think this one is very interesting. Okay, we're going to go on to our last take here, and this was the take that made me, when I read it the first time, which I couldn't find it, I never screenshotted it, but I think that this is, I summarized it with 3 simple words for this last take, but this is the one that made me go, huh, the most when I saw it. And I think it led to some very interesting discourse within my own mind, and I'm excited to share it here. Deduction is overrated. So, I think that this is an interesting take to have. And I think that it is not true, but it is true. Which sounds like bullshit. Like I'm just trying to like walk the line and be my devil's advocate self here. But deduction is a good card to get you an additional clue. A card for a clue, right? But the question is, what is deduction, right? Deduction is tempo, right? Deduction is just tempo. It's the same with Vicious Blow. Vicious Blow is just tempo. So the question is, this is kind of similar to what we talked about when I talked about in the last hot take video with Sixth Sense, right? Is deduction the best tempo that you can get for your current build. And that is one of those things where the idea of deck construction in Arkham, I think with the current, well, sorry, not the current, but the current legacy environment, the current, not current, but the current legacy environment, it's more of a combo game, right? Where your deck should be, the choices in your deck should be more about what do all the pieces do together as opposed to what do the pieces do individually, right? So at a certain point, deduction might not be the card that you want to put into your deck. An example of this, something that I've done in my deck building, is sometimes I don't include an ally in my deck because there's not an ally that works for it. So rather than sacrificing 2 cards in my deck to force in an ally, because you should always have an ally in your deck, my thought process instead is, what are the cards that are better? And I think that this take is ultimately saying the exact same thing. Is deduction the best card for your tempo in your deck? Or are there better ways that you can get more clues if you're not taking advantage of the fact that deduction is a skill? So if you don't have skill synergy, if you're not taking the fact that deduction is practice, you're not playing practice makes perfect. If you're not playing like some sort of seeker synergy where you care about like let's say for example ancestral knowledge, right? Like where you can get your skills set aside at the start of the game. Is deduction the best thing you can be doing? Are you going to be trying a Book v Shroud approach? Because Book v Shroud, where you're just like doing basic investigate, saving your actions on moving, and kind of just like using your other slots to draw cards. Deduction is going to be in that, work well in that, because also probably practice makes perfect is in that deck, right? But if you're like a seeker deck that is instead trying to like use, for example, archaic glyphs, deduction is probably not going to be worth that card in that deck, and something that either like recharges your archaic glyphs, essentially acting like a deduction, is going to be better in the long term for your deck. So I do think that this is true, and while I disagree, I don't think it's overrated. I think the card is very good in the right deck. But I think at this point now, in Arkham Horror's lifespan, it's more about finding the right card for your deck as opposed to just playing the good card. Similar thing when I talked about Faustian Bargain in the past, when I talked about comparing like Faustian Bargain and Bank Job and Grift, right? These are cards that they're all economy options, but it's like, what is the best economy option for your deck? And I think it's a very similar thing with deduction, where deduction is a good card, but it's a tempo card. It's not the end all and be all. It's just a form of gaining tempo, right? So do you have better tempo options to do that? Or is deduction going to be your best your tempo option? Because for me, when I look at deduction, I think it's zero cost. It's just a card that gives me a clue when I want a clue. I'll eventually upgrade into the other version. And if I'm playing a low to the ground build, deduction is very low to the ground if I want it. If I'm playing a very elaborate build where I'm trying to get a bunch of combo pieces into play and get multiple clues like at multiple times, deduction is going to lose value because of that. So I think that is a very interesting thing that we should look at and question old staples and see if there's a reason that we're running them in this deck, or is there something else that could be better? And I think that this is a very interesting thought to go through with this one on just the 3 simple words: deduction is overrated. Okay. Yes, we did it. Another video in the books. 5 Arkham Horror hot takes for members of our community. My apologies for the 2 spelling errors. There might have been another one I missed, but once again, it's not a PBG video if there's not a spelling error. I want to thank everyone who watched this video and to everyone who shared their hot takes. There's a bunch that I still haven't used. I like to do one of these every few months because, as I mentioned, it's very fun for me to challenge my own thoughts on this game. So thank you for everyone who shared their hot takes. If you have any you want to share in the comments, let me know. I'll save them in my hot take database and munch on them for the next 6 months before the next one of these videos. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Have a good one. And as always, a GG's.